Hello, everyone. Good morning. And welcome to our webinar. I'm going to introduce myself here in a minute. I think there's probably still some folks logging on, so I'll just go ahead and kind of give an introduction to what the webinar is. I'm also, hold on one second, make sure that my screens are set up correctly. All right. Yeah, so welcome. So this is a webinar format. So we are live, but it is being recorded. So after this, for folks that weren't able to make it or maybe missed the beginning, a recording will be sent to you so you can rewatch it if you missed something. But yeah, so but the recording will go out, but we are live. It is for privacy and confidentiality. All the audio and video for attendees is already cut off, so you don't need to worry about that. If you do have questions live, the chat feature in these broadcasts is actually cut off again for confidentiality reasons and privacy reasons, but there is a questions part, and I think you can probably see that, but you can write me questions during the webinar and I can answer them live. So if you think of questions later, there is going to be, my contact information will be there and you can send that. So I think that is it. And I do think it looks like a few more people are kind of popping in, but I'll go ahead and get started this morning since we're here. Let me pull up my slides. All right. I am going to share. Sorry, I should have had this sharing before, but I'm going to share my screen, right? Just a window. All right, I think you can see that, and I'm going to start all right. Perfect. I don't know if you can't see me now, huh? I do want you to be able to see me too. So maybe I'll pause that. Okay. So, welcome to the webinar, Managing Anxiety During Uncertain Times. I do have a slideshow that I'm going to attach when you get your email, and I may throw up here in a minute. And it does look like you are able to see me when okay, so I'll show that. Okay. Sorry, just figuring out all the tools. So my name is Jessica King, and I am a therapist and the owner of Still Point Counseling and Wellness here in Wilmington, North Carolina, and work with individuals of all ages that are experiencing chronic stress or problems in regards to that. With adjustments, so during uncertain times, during times of change, as well as traumas and in the face of chronic stress. So all of these things I work with on a daily basis, and I use kind of psychodynamic or psycho educational tools that we'll kind of go over today, as well as my experience in yoga and yoga philosophy. And so that's going to be intertwined into what we're talking about a little bit, just to give you some tools and understanding of what you can use. I will say this is a psychoeducational webinar, and it's really not a replacement for any kind of therapeutic relationship or mental health. So if you are experiencing anxiety in terms of impeding your functioning or in terms of a mental health problem, it would be something that you would want to seek help outside of that. And we can certainly discuss that if you need some resources for that. But this is really just information to understand anxiety and stress better, to understand what it is, and then some tools to be able to use during those times. So Yes. So there is my contact information. If you do have a question live, if you're just now coming on, you can type into the questions and I can try and answer it. But if you have a question later, feel free to shoot me an email or call me and we can talk about it. All right. All right, so you can see two slides, but we have to swipe over and one slide is on the screen and then we swipe over and see you. Okay, so I guess this is typically they both show up and I'm not really sure why um, it is doing that. So I'm going to keep going with it and you guys can choose what you'd like to see, the slide or me. I guess. Although now it's not letting me move my slides. Oh, technical difficulties, huh? Oh, there we go. All right, so change is the only constant in life. I love this quote, right? So this is what we're all talking about today, is that why are we always so surprised by change? Because it really is always happening. Our work is always changing. We try to put systems in place so that they seem consistent and that we know what to expect, but there's usually something that comes up and we have to adapt and we have to change. Our children are always growing and changing and in different phases of life. Our relationships are changing based on what's going on at a certain time period and what we've learned or what our partners have learned. So change is constant. It's always happening. So today we really want to talk about like why is that hard for us? What are some things that we can learn to be more adaptable to that change? How can we look for the cues? And more importantly, how can we listen to those cues when they happen? But really just leaning into this idea that there is uncertainty in all of life, and that when we can kind of lean into that and start to become curious about that, that we start to be able to adapt, be able to manage that better, because we are adaptable creatures. That's what we want as human beings. Our bodies are wanting to adapt. So that's why I like to think of when things change, we have this little like inner controller in our mind, and we know what that is when it shows up, right? That starts to figure things out. Okay, this is new and different. What are we going to do to be able to adapt to this situation? Oftentimes, our body is really thinking about that in terms of safety. So, what am I going to do to keep myself safe in this situation? So our inner controller shows up. It becomes a problem when it starts to become over controlling, right? So we start ruminating on the same thing, or we become obsessive with our thoughts. Blaming and shaming starts to occur. So that starts to kind of weave into this over controlling aspect where we can't see the possibilities and we can't figure out what we can control and what we can't. And so being able to notice the difference between those two things, because our inner controller is good. He's showing up, he's helping keep us safe and figuring things out for us. Our over controller is not. So noticing when that happens, and that's when maybe we are stressed, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the difference between stress, good stress, bad stress, and anxiety. But that's when our stress kind of starts to like maybe shift into that anxious space. We also feel it not just mentally, not just that inner control in our mind, but we feel it physically. So it starts to impact our bodies, right? We feel it as tension, pain, sometimes even sickness. We start to become ill. And so starting to lean in and notice that those bodily cues is one thing that we'll start to talk about. And then finally, we start to feel it in our heart. And that may feel a little intangible to talk about the heart, but quite literally, oftentimes we can see it in people's bodies, right? When they're stressed. So feeling the tension in the shoulders, as we become overwhelmed with our thoughts, maybe a collapsing around the heart center, that embodied feeling, that hardening around the heart also just starts to feel like disconnection from other people. And when we're disconnected, we are social beings. And so we start to become unwell. So those are the types of things that we're trying to start to notice the cues for before they happen, right? And to kind of lean into this idea that anxiety is a normal reaction to a change or a stressful situation, and what are we going to do with it? So we'll start to talk a little bit about what anxiety is, and we're going to bounce back and forth a little bit between anxiety and stress for a minute, just getting kind of the understanding, really a broad understanding or a brief understanding of it, before we dive into some skills. So anxiety is not stress. So we're going to talk about stress in a minute, but anxiety is not stress. And it's not an indicator that you're broken or something needs to be fixed about you. So it is a perfectly natural reaction, that, again, that normalization of it, that when we can start to notice it, that we can have a handle on it instead of it having a handle on us, because it's not a life sentence. So I like to think about anxiety as a feeling or an energy that just shows up to help us respond to our environment. And again, this is not a replacement for when anxiety, a generalized anxiety or a very specific anxiety that has become a problem in your life. That is real and that needs to be addressed and can be addressed in many different ways. But again, today we're talking a little bit about how can we know what anxiety is when it shows up in our life before it becomes that problem and manage it. And if you think about anxiety being like the worry or the fear right before it impedes our functioning, then we can recognize that as just this energy, right? It's just showing up to tell us a little bit of it's saying, hey, wake up, there's something that you need to respond to in your environment, and we need to figure that out. The difference between anxiety and stress is that stress is the external cue, right? So it's something that's happening in our life that is it's triggering us to react in a way to it to, again, keep ourselves safe. There's very positive forms of stress. So, and often we're very motivated by it. It keeps us productive. So if I have a deadline at work, if I have this big project to do, if I didn't have the deadline, I may not really be motivated to start working on it. So that stress showing up with the deadline keeps me motivated. It helps me focus on doing my best work, and really coping within that frame, or time period. It becomes distress when we are excessively worrying about one thing. It's kind of outside of our normal capabilities of coping, and it starts to impede our functioning. So if the stress is within my range of coping, then I'm going to do better. I'm going to focus on it. I'm going to be able to concentrate. And then if it's outside of that and I'm ruminating and I'm overthinking and I'm feeling this stress in my body, oftentimes I'm now not motivated anymore. The shutdown happens, or I can't concentrate on what I'm doing, or I feel so overwhelmed and can't pick the next thing to do that I become distressed. That's distress. It's negatively impacting me. And we see that in chronic forms of stress when we can't meet a stressor that happens in our life and then be able to rest and relax afterwards. It becomes distress. We often have internal distress that we may be putting on ourselves. But the reality around stress is that it is a really normal response to what's going on in our environment. And when we learn to notice it, we can become more resilient. So actually having more, small bits of stress in our life make us more able to cope with future challenges. So to understand that a little bit, I'm going to explain the body's stress response system, but very briefly. So in our nervous system, we evolved as human beings to be able to adapt to our environments and survive. And we did that through the development of the autonomic nervous system. So there's the sympathetic, and that's going to be like our turned on phase. That's when the stressor comes, what happens in our body to be able to react. And then there's the parasympathetic, that's our rest and digest. And what I'm telling you is really reductive, like a very small way of how they interact. But just so for those of you that may not know a little bit about the body's stress response system, this is how it works, because I think sometimes when we know more, we can do better. So when we are in our rest and our digest, there's also this, as human beings, we like to be socially engaged. So usually when we can relax and we're at rest, we can be socially engaged with other people and we feel more connected to others. When a stressor comes on, our body, and if we think about when we were cavemen, those stressors were like being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or something like that. But now, currently in our life, our stressors are work-related or relationship-related, something like that. But our body doesn't really know the difference. So the stressor comes on and our body starts to react. It tells us, oh, you need to be aware that something might be changing and that you're going to need to adapt. So oftentimes things start happening, like our heart rate increases, our breathing rate increases, blood flow is being sent out to the major muscle groups of our body, because if you think about evolutionarily wise, we need to be able to react to stressors by running or fighting, getting away from the thing that could hurt us. In reality, when we're up on a deadline at work, we're not running anywhere, right? So, but those are some of the things that you might notice in your body when the stressor comes on. And so in the way our body would typically work is it sends all those things out to be able to react to the stressor. And then when that goes away, we need to return to our parasympathetic, or that rest and digest. Sometimes what happens though, when we're chronically stressed, is we stay in that fight or flight. We stay in that response system until our body kind of like it realizes, oh, this is never going away. I'm not able to keep myself safe in this way. And then we move into more of a freeze response or a shutdown. And that's when we start to feel disconnected, and what I was talking about kind of with the heart center, that idea of feeling disconnected from others and motivated in our life. So that's a little bit about how it works kind of in the body. And I think the way anxiety starts to intertwine into what's happening in stress is that, again, if we think about it as a normal or natural emotion that pops up when there is a stressor, when those stressors don't go away, anxiety can start to bleed into impeding our functioning, right? So it becomes intense, excessive, persistent worry or fear about everyday situations. So some of those symptoms right there, rapid breathing, sweating, feeling tired, you can probably see where those are all coming from that body's natural stress response system, that fight or flight. I need rapid breathing, I need sweating to be able to run or fight in the situation, or when that doesn't happen, I need to be able to shut down and kind of be in this freeze response to keep my body safe, and that's that tiredness occurring. So we can see where anxiety kind of starts to fit into stress when stress becomes overwhelming or something that we can't manage. Anxiety is related to lots of different disorders, which we're really not talking about today, but they do all sort of revolve around this excessive worry, tension, ruminations, and they interrupt our daily functioning. That's when we know we've kind of crossed over into anxiety. What we know from the neuroscience is that when folks with anxiety disorders, that they have more activation in their amygdala, and that's related to that fight or flight response and the fear response in our body, so that we know that anxiety is related to stress. So if you're feeling more anxiety these days, it makes sense, right? We are in unprecedented times. It's a change that we've never been in. And there's lots of stressors related to that, whether you had to work from home instead of being in your normal office. And that's layered on top of having children at home, or that's layered on top of maybe the loss of a job, or worry about your own health and having to still do the daily functionings. If you're feeling this excessive worry, this persistent fear, feeling activated all the time, it makes sense because we are in a time period of high stress. There are other factors that contribute to anxiety, which we're really not going to go in today, but it is important to remember that even if you listen to all these tools today and get this information, and you're still experiencing some of those symptoms that you relate to anxiety, that there are other things that that can play factors in that, whether prior trauma, sometimes there's genetic factors, if you have other mental health disorders. And so those are just things to consider, and know that you're not doing anything wrong if some of these skills or things we do today don't automatically feel like they help. All right. So that was a little bit about what I really, how the neuroscience works with how stress and anxiety intertwines and what's happening in our body when it occurs. Now, what are we going to do about it, right? So I'm going to come to you with a holistic perspective, starting from what we call healing from the bottom up, and we'll also talk about healing from the top down. So when we say bottom up, we mean from the bottom, thinking about how I told you about, I didn't tell you about when the stress response system in the brain occurs, it starts in our brain stem. So if this was our head and this was our brain stem, so this is down at the bottom of the base of the head at the neck, this is where we get triggered in that safety response. This is like the old part of our brain that says, oh, there's something that's going to hurt you. So it triggers there. This middle part of our brain, where my thumb is kind of wrapped inside, that's our limbic part of our brain. That's where the emotional content, our memory is. And then the top of that, if I'm talking about my fingers on top, if that's the top of the front of my brain, then that is the frontal lobe, the executive functioning. That's where I do all my thinking. So healing from the bottom up means we're going to start at the bottom of our brain and work our way up to the top. So in this way, if we think about what's happening in that brain stem, it's when something happens, a stressor happens, and then we get activated in our body, right? So if we're going to start from the bottom up, we want to bring balance to the nervous system in the body. That we can do this in many ways, but in general, we want to just be aware of the body sensations. We want to get really present with what's going on in the body. We call this grounding often, and we're going to do it a little bit later. And we want to have a very present moment awareness and notice that what our breathing is impacting what's going on in our nervous system. Because again, what we talked about, when the nervous system turns on, our heart rate increases, our breathing increases. So if I can bring awareness to our breath and slow that breath, I'm going to stimulate my nervous system to calm down. I wrote the vagal nerve in here, but we're not talking about the vagal nerve today, but that's another part of our nervous system that when we breathe, it stimulates it and it helps our body to calm down. So those are things that we can do. But anything that we think about from the bottom up, it's going to be about the body. So what are some things that you can do? And you might just reflect for yourself for a moment. What are some things that you do for your body that start to calm your central nervous system? So this, and we're going to do some skills together in a minute, but this could be anything, any kind of movement, a walk outside, being in nature, yoga, any other like very mindful movement type things like Tai Chi or martial arts, body work. So I don't know if we think about that, but massages or if you can't even go to massage, our own physical touch, and meditation. Meditation is actually both, and we're going to talk about that today. But the reason meditation is because when we come and we take a seat, so I'm sitting here in my seat and I'm thinking about how I'm sitting on the seat, what it feels like underneath me, and my feet on the ground. And I place my hands in a particular posture. My body starts to become settled. My nervous system recognizes that I don't need to be running and moving or fighting anything. And so it starts to change. And what happens then, and why it's called bottom up processing, is once my body settles, my nervous system says, okay, you don't need the fight or flight anymore. If we're already in shutdown, it starts walking itself out and it brings that front brain back online, right? And so now I can think more clearly. The thoughts come more clearly. There's more clarity to them. There's space in between them. And so now I can start to look at my choices. And that's where we start to disrupt that pattern of anxiety, of ruminating thoughts and obsessive thinking. So that's a little bit, we want to think about what are the things that I can do to settle my nervous system. So if you have some of those thoughts, maybe you jot them down now. and we'll have some ideas later. From a yogic philosophy's perspective, I like to bring this in here. You don't need to remember these words, but it's called the koshas because I think in our Western world and the way we think about things is there's the body and there's the mind, and they're two different things and they're not connected at all. But the way yoga talks about this is that there are different layers of our body. And that those words there that you don't need to know talk about those layers. The physical body sheath, so that is my physical body. That's me getting grounded here. My breath body, so where can I settle in my breath? Can I slow the breath? And in yoga, we think of the breath as energy too. It is moving energy through our body into different cells of our body, different organs. And so our breath is kind of that link between these different layers of the body, and that our mental and our emotional layers are part of the body. And then finally connecting to kind of our own identity with self, like what our wisdom, that's another layer. And then finally, even the connection with others, that this body, I settle and be grounded in the fact that while I'm here, I'm also connected to others and something greater that's moving and going on. So I like to bring that up here because when we do our meditation in a minute, there is a point where I'll be bringing up these different things, but when we can start to connect the fact that what's going on in my body is not separate from what's going on in my mind, and it's not separate from what's going on in my emotions, that they are all intertwined, then we start to have a greater understanding of really how our body works together for wellness. So that's healing from the bottom up. But healing from the top down, if we're going to look at our brain again as our hand, this is the hand model. This is actually Dan Siegel's. If you're interested in more neuroscience stuff, you can look up Dan Siegel. But he came up with this kind of like idea of the hand model of the brain. But we're going to look at how can we settle the thoughts? How can we work with this cognitive part, this thinking part of our brain that's in the front here of the brain? How can we work with that? And in doing that, we start to settle the mental, emotional, and the body. So when we're in distress, our thoughts and feelings and actions, they all feel disconnected and disjointed. There isn't that clarity piece. And we often feel like, especially when our anxiety is the highest, is that we've got to solve all of the problems in all of the world and do it all right now with no one else's help. And that's what I think everyone, I love because I know exactly what that feels like, right? I think everyone does that, like when there's so many things and I don't know which one to choose and how to get started, and that I'm the only one that can really figure it out. The ways that we can work with this, the way I like to think about it or break it down, is that if we're going to start from the top up, first we've got to orient ourselves to the landscape or what's going on, educate ourselves. So what is the problem? What is the stressor? What is triggering me right now? So what is the larger picture? And quite literally, we'll talk about in a minute, sometimes just even changing our perspective. Anxiety is it's not self-centered, but it's a very narrow view of what's going on, right? So even just, and I'm doing this with my eyes, even just physically and literally changing our view, changing our perspective, looking at a bigger perspective, taking a step back. So I'm looking at the landscape, educate myself on what the problem is and what are my resources. And so now I've gotten those kind of thought out or laid out, and now I'm going to take action. So the only thing that we're responsible for at any point in time ever is just the next right action. Anxiety tells us, or worry and excessive worry tells us, oh, I've got to do all the things. But the reality is I only have to do the next thing. So figuring out what is my next right action and what are the resources I need to get there. And once I have that in place and I'm taking the next right action, I then have to go through the process of letting go of the attachment to what is going to be the outcome, and letting go of the things that I can't control, the things that are not my decisions and that I can't make. This is not an easy practice. but it is one that is practiced through meditation. And so that's where meditation comes, that it becomes in that it is a bottom up and a top down process, that not only do we settle the body in meditation, but we practice working with the thoughts, that our thoughts never stop. But that if I can start to become the observer and the witnesser of those thoughts, and I can start to learn to let go of some of that control. So that's where that comes in. But maybe here, thinking of other top-down ways that help settle your mind or help you deal with excessive worry and rumination. These could be talking to a friend, right? So as I'm orienting myself to the landscape, educating myself on what the resources are, maybe it's a friend or a partner or someone, being able to talk that out. Maybe it's a therapist. Maybe it's journaling. I get all those thoughts out onto the paper. And again, maybe it's meditation. And maybe you have some other ways that you really work with your thoughts or work with what's going on to the mind to start settling the body. But we've become connected to a larger whole. And this whole idea of letting go, because we're going to start moving into some skills, is a hard one, I think, to wrap our mind around, because it's like, well, it's not that easy. I can't just let go, right? So there's a great story that I heard from Tara Brach, and she is a great resource. She wrote Radical Acceptance and Radical Self-Compassion, and so if you're interested in this idea of just accepting what is and letting go, you might want to look up Tara Brach. But she tells a story of a farmer. And that farmer lost a horse. So the horse ran away. And all the neighbors come and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What, you're such misfortune. That's awful for you." And he says, "Maybe." And then the next day, the horse comes back, and with it comes like 4 wild horses. And so all the neighbors come over again, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're so lucky. I can't believe this happened to you. You now have 4 horses. That's amazing." And he says, "Maybe." And the next day, his son is trying to break one of the wild horses and train it, and he falls off the horse and breaks his leg. And the neighbors come over and they say, "Oh my word, like, this is awful. How unfortunate for you. This is going to be devastating for your family. He won't be able to work on the farm," and all those things. And the farmer says, "Maybe." And the next day, the government, and I'm not really sure in the story, I think I forgot what it is, but people come by there drafting for the war. And they come through the town looking for all the able-bodied men, and they pass his son over because he has a broken leg. And the neighbors come over and they say, "How wonderful for you, your son doesn't have to go to war." And the farmer says, "Maybe." So we could keep going on like that, but the point of that story is that we get so wrapped up in our expectations, and that when things change, and we know that they will, we then become wrapped up in how are we going to control and change this, because we have an expectation of what things are going to be. So if we can let go of that, if we can start to settle in and lean into the uncertainty that is life, and just let go of the expectation and be settled in just what is, kind of an acceptance of what is, then we start to kind of walk ourselves out of the distress, walk ourselves out of that internal distress that happens when there's excessive worry. All right. So if we take a holistic perspective, we need to do both of these practices, top down and bottom up, right? So we're doing both. We're going to try and settle our body at the same time, becoming the witness to our thoughts and letting go of that rumination. Lean into the uncertainty with a compassionate presence. So we want to lean in to what feels uncomfortable. And once we do that, and we're compassionate with ourselves because it feels uncomfortable, and we're not supposed to not feel uncomfortable. That's the criticism we give ourselves, right? If we can lean in with compassionate presence, then we start to see new possibilities and choices. We start to flow with life's challenges and changes instead of being resistant to them. And when we incorporate bottom up and top down, we're going to promote resilience. This was a slide I put in from a talk I do on trauma, but resiliency is just our ability to be transformed from challenges. And the way we increase our resiliency is to ground ourselves in the moment, to process what's going on, and then connect. And to know that we're not alone in solving our problems and that we have choices. So some skills that we'll practice here with the last few minutes of our webinar today are an awareness. Well, the first one is just an awareness of our triggers and our signs to stress and anxiety. So in this moment, maybe mentally or jotting down, what are some of your and you might reflect later on this a little bit longer, what are some of your major triggers? So triggers, the stressors that come into your life that really ramp up that inner controller or over controller in your mind. And what are the signs that it's showing up in your body? Is it the rumination there first, or is there something else? Is there some tension? Is there something in the experience in your body that you can notice so that when it starts to creep in, before you get to the over controlling and the obsessive thinking and the blaming and the shaming, that you can notice? The second skill is going to be to lean into that uncertainty with loving kindness and self-compassion. So we cannot do any of this work unless you start to recognize that you are human and that you're having a human experience, and that even as much as we can practice being present and letting go of expectation and letting our thought be the observer of our thoughts and not ruminate, it's going to happen. And that's a human thing to happen. And we have to be self-compassionate. So when it happens, when we practice here in a minute meditation and grounding our body, and we don't feel grounded and we don't feel less tense, and our mind does not stop to say that's a human experience, and that the practice and knowing I can just begin again and try again. So meeting yourself and meeting uncertain times, meeting changes with loving kindness and self-compassion. We are supposed to change. Life is uncertain. Expand your perspective, literally. That's what I was talking about earlier. Anxiety becomes such tunnel vision. So this idea of an embodied experience, can I step back? Not only do I want to broaden my internal perspective of the situation and the problem, but can I just physically step back? So can I step back and take in my peripheral vision? Rick Hansen is a psychologist that does a lot of neuroscience work, and some of the work and the research that he's done says just in noticing your peripheral vision in the moment, that the stress response to the stress in the body goes down. So I'm not exactly sure how they measured that. I could give you more information, but that's so interesting, right? So this idea that I need to broaden my perspective to be able to problem solve, but like, can I just physically do that? Notice what's going on around me. Notice what's in my peripheral vision. And then once I do that, ground and orient myself. So I'm going to orient myself to the problem, but I'm also going to ground my body. I'm going to engage myself in the senses around me and what's going on in the present moment. Breathe. So we have to breathe. And that's for very physical reasons, right? So it's gonna trigger that nervous system to calm down. And then the breath is that link between what's going on in our body, what's going on in our mind, and what's going on in that more spiritual aspect or our connection with other people. So we're gonna bring awareness to the breath. And then fostering the witness mind or the beginner's mind. Knowing that we do not have to know all the answers, that also ramps up anxiety in uncertain times and worry. We don't have to know all the answers. Can we start with the beginner's mind, that I'm just going to notice when a thought comes up, and then that thought, it doesn't attach to a story. It doesn't mean anything about my past or my future. It just is what is right now. And can I witness it and be the observer of it without creating meaning and stories behind it? So we're going to practice a little bit here. And I'm going to go ahead and take this off so I can see myself. I think y'all said you could see me if you were sliding back and forth, but we're going to practice just for about 5 minutes or so together. I do have a last quote on here, maybe we'll bring up in a minute, but I'm going to try and take my screen off there. Okay, so If you've been listening, and I don't know where you all are listening, but maybe start to move yourself to a comfortable seat. If you are at your desk, you are going to just start to sit back in your chair. And you want to stay alert and upright. So if you're on a sofa or whatnot, you might lean up a little bit or even lean back on the sofa, but let the shoulders drop down and back. If you prefer to sit on the floor, grab a seat on the comfortable seat on the floor. And we're going to place our feet flat on the floor and start to if you are sitting in a chair. If you're sitting on the floor, just start to notice the floor underneath you. So this is that grounding, and taking that larger perspective, we start to maybe look up, and you can take in your peripheral vision. You might even orient yourself to your room by moving your gaze around the room. So just noticing colors or textures or light. So we're just taking a larger perspective, orienting ourselves in our space. And we'll softly bring our gaze back to looking a little head in front of us. You might look down the bridge of the nose. Or you might even close the eyes if that's comfortable to you. And we'll start to notice the body. So that physical body. Maybe you take a little body scan from the bottoms of the feet, up the legs, the hips, the core, the chest, the arms. Tune into that breath body. So just noticing the breath gently as it comes in and out through the nose. You don't have to control it, but maybe in noticing it, having an awareness of it, it begins to deepen. And then notice that mental body. So what are where are your thoughts at this morning? And it's not in a judgment or a place to kind of criticize them or create a story, just noticing, are they restless? Are they foggy? Is there space between them? Noticing the emotional body. So what are you feeling today in this moment? And start to soften the physical body. So can you relax the shoulders of the face? Begin to maybe even say, let go with each breath, letting go of tension. Can you start to soften the mental body? Maybe letting go of thoughts or stepping back from them, just observing them for what comes up. Returning to the anchoring of the breath or the physical body, if that's helpful. And then finally, that emotional body, maybe even visualizing the heart space, softening in your heart space. Maybe with each breath, letting go. As you let go, feeling the heart space settle and open for connection. And finally, taking One deep breath in, slowly breathing. Maybe the breath comes all the way down into the belly and you hold for just a moment. Then slowly exhale. If tension creeps back into the body or the thoughts become more restless, just noticing, oh, that happened again, and begin again. Begin again, letting go. And if you're at home, you may want to practice this a little longer. Or maybe you come back to your body by feeling your feet on the floor or the seat underneath you. If the eyes were closed, you start to flutter them open, bringing in light, or maybe orienting yourself, looking around the room again. All right. So that was just a few minutes of using that technique of meditation, which is bottom up and top down, calming our body to let our mind slow down, watching and being the observer of our thoughts to in turn start to let the body feel relaxed and rested and back into that place where I can socially engage and connect again. So if you have any questions, I can stick around on here for a few minutes. So you're welcome to write them in the question box. Welcome to get in touch with me later. I will attach the slides to the email that goes out, and that has my contact information in it. If you needed future resources, if you're feeling like this is one of those things that's a real struggle and I need some support, so feel free to reach out and I'll help get you connected to the support you need, because again, this was psychoeducational for your benefit to understand how stress and anxiety maybe are interwoven in a very normal process of reacting to change, and that we can use certain skills to help notice the cues and then react or lean into that change, those feelings of uncertainty. We change our relationship with anxiety. So while anxiety is in a life sentence now and it's not what's broken and wrong in me, it's just a normal experience. And if I can notice that and label it and lean into it, and then use the skills I need to ground myself and calm the mind, that it allows us to have more choices and open our possibilities in those times of change to know what to do next, the next right action. So I hope this was helpful for you today. I don't see any questions. So if you are interested in more meditation resources, feel free to reach back out and I can send you some. And I hope to see you on a future webinar. Goodbye.